They are so broke financially. The couple are a laughingstock in Montecito. A really good example of how financially challenged they are. It's almost unheard of to buy a house in Montecito and just move into it, right? You buy a house and you do like a $7 million remodeling job, right? To make it all up to date. You don't take the sort of, we've seen the insides of the house.
Yeah.
It's hideous. It's absolutely hideous.
Meghan Markle posted an astrology reading this week that described the past 7 years as the hardest of her life. The tension between who you actually are and what the world around you was willing to see has been exhausting in a way that is hard to explain to people who have not lived it. Those were the words she amplified. And the reaction from multiple quarters, from the former staff members who worked for her and ended up in therapy, from the journalists who have been covering the Sussex story closely, and from the British public whose most recent polling tells its own story, has been something between incredulity and genuine anger. Let me be precise about what the astrology post actually was. Meghan shared a reading from a Las Vegas-based astrologer who describes herself as your ride or die astrologer, targeted at people born under Taurus, Leo, Scorpio, and Aquarius, which is, at a basic mathematical level, approximately a quarter of the planet. The reading described these 4 signs as ending the hardest 7 years of their lives. On April 25th, it spoke of confidence taking hits it had no business taking, of people questioning their creative direction, their spotlight, their worth. It described the pressure lifting and the space to exist without fighting for it. The astrologer, warming to her subject after Meghan shared the post, added her own gloss. She described Meghan directly as the Queen with an uppercase Q, and said that she had been public proof of the astrological transit. She expressed enthusiasm about Meghan reigning again. Now, the astrological framing can be engaged with charitably. Many people find meaning in this kind of content, and there is nothing inherently wrong with sharing it.
He posted this week, Taurus, Leo, Scorpio, and Aquarius ending the hardest 7 years of their lives on April 25th. The tension between who you actually are and what the world around you was willing to see has been exhausting in a way that is hard to explain to people who have not lived it. Your confidence took hits it had no business taking. You questioned your creative direction, your spotlight, your worth. April 25th, the pressure lifts. You get the space to just exist without fighting for its spirit daughter. And this astrologer in question, Christina Antuna, very Meghan Markle-like. She describes herself as your ride or die astrologer, Las Vegas-based.
The problem is not the astrology. The problem is the specific framing of 7 years of hardship, amplified by someone with Meghan's platform, at a moment when the people who actually experienced hardship in Meghan's orbit are still processing what working for her cost them. The Sussex Survivors Club, the name given to the group of former staff members who left the Sussex operation under difficult circumstances, has been speaking out again, specifically in response to the 7 hardest years framing. And what they are expressing, through journalists who have covered this story closely, is not primarily anger. It is something closer to disbelief. These are people who, by multiple accounts, left jobs with the Sussexes in states of significant distress, some requiring therapy, some requiring more serious mental health support. Some of them had careers derailed. Some had their confidence systematically undermined over months of sustained treatment by an employer who, according to documented communications, identified specific targets and worked to remove them. The documented evidence matters here. This is not just a collection of anonymous grievances from disgruntled former employees. Jason Knuth, who served as Harry and Meghan's communications secretary, sent a formal email to his superior, Simon Case, now the cabinet secretary, raising specific concerns about Meghan's treatment of staff. That email, which has been reported and is a matter of record, describes a pattern of behavior that now explicitly characterized as bullying. Specific individuals are named in the email.
Question, really true suffering? The past 7 years? And she added, there is an argument for not caring what the world thinks, and perhaps especially what spirit daughter thinks, and for not even trying to explain how exhausted you are. However, driven by curiosity, I've looked back over what exactly Meghan has been up to for the past 7 years, and honestly, it's extraordinary. At pretty much every turn, she's got exactly what she wanted. Why on earth isn't she celebrating?
Specific incidents are described. This is not gossip. This is a formal complaint from a senior official in writing to another senior official about conduct that he felt he had an obligation to document. Against this background, Meghan amplifying a reading about having had the hardest 7 years of her life is not simply tone deaf. It is an inversion of reality that the people who experience the other side of that 7 years cannot watch without a strong reaction. Hilary Rose, writing in the Times, put it with characteristic precision. She went back through what Meghan has actually been doing for the past 7 years and described it as, at pretty much every turn, getting exactly what she wanted. A royal wedding watched by billions, a Netflix deal, a memoir, speaking fees, a lifestyle brand, a Montecito mansion.
Cannot quite figure out how to get there. For anyone who has ever forgotten just how amazing they really are, perhaps some of Meghan's former courtiers, who call themselves the Sussex Survivors Club, will read it and think, yes, that reminds us of her. Perhaps they'll even repent. Or Meghan, they might think how she suffered, emerging only now from 7 unendurable years. Then again, maybe they won't. Well, Tom Sykes, you know the answer to that.
Global attention on a scale that almost no private individual ever achieves. The suggestion that these 7 years have been the hardest of Meghan's life requires either a very narrow definition of hard or a complete reframing of what ordinary people's difficult experiences actually look like. The comparison is not to suggest that Meghan has had no difficulties. She has had significant difficulties. The press hostility has been real and in some cases genuinely excessive. The racist elements of some coverage were real and wrong. The institutional constraints of royal life were real and felt genuinely suffocating. None of that is invented. But the gap between those genuine difficulties experienced from a position of extraordinary privilege with the resources of a royal household, with a global platform and a $100 million commercial deal, and the hardships of the people who have had to seek psychiatric care as a result of working for her, is vast. And Meghan's public positioning as the victim of the hardest 7 years makes that gap visible in a way that is difficult to look at without a strong reaction. The death stare footage that is circulated from the Australian tour adds a specific visual dimension to this picture. Meghan's head of staff, Sarah Frosmo, described as a tough, experienced professional with a serious career background, gently taps Harry on the shoulder to direct him towards some people on a balcony. A completely normal piece of staff management in any busy public engagement.
It's incredibly offensive, as you say, to people who have been left genuinely traumatized by working for her. And the problem is, right, is that and when journalists, we pick up the phone and we speak to former staff who've worked with her and they tell us horrendous stories of how she's a demon boss, or she's the psycho, or she's the dictator in high heels, or she screamed at them and belittled them and undermined them. As the Sussexes will always say, this is completely made up. You are not naming, this is what they were saying to me, you're not naming the sources. It's all rubbish. And
Meghan's response, caught on camera, is a death stare of remarkable intensity directed at the member of staff who touched her husband. For the Sussex Survivors Club, for the people who worked in that environment and who remember exactly what it felt like to be on the receiving end of that kind of look, the footage is not surprising. It is confirmation of something they have been describing for years, and that the Sussex Communications operation has consistently denied. The workplace psychopath framing used by a former staff member in conversation with journalists is worth addressing carefully, because it is a strong characterization that deserves neither automatic acceptance nor reflexive dismissal. Workplace psychopathy in the clinical sense describes a specific pattern of behavior, the ability to present as charming and warm in public-facing contexts while behaving very differently in private, the deliberate targeting of specific individuals for undermining or removal, the absence of genuine empathy combined with a sophisticated ability to perform it. Whether Meghan meets the clinical definition is not something any journalist or commentator can determine. What is observable is that the pattern of behavior described by multiple independent sources, The public warmth and the private coldness, the targeting of specific staff members. The documented bullying complaint is consistent with that description. And the footage of the death stare, alongside years of reporting from people who have no obvious commercial motive to lie about their experiences, gives it more weight than the denial deserves. Now let's address the financial picture, because the Montecito story tells its own version of where the Sussex operation actually is. The house in Montecito, purchased at approximately $14 million, reportedly carrying multiple mortgages, has not been renovated in the way that properties of that value are typically renovated in that market. In Montecito, at that price point, buyers typically invest significantly in renovation immediately after purchase. The interiors that have been visible in various pieces of Sussex content are described by observers of that market as not having been updated to the standard that the house's value demands. The suggestion is that the renovation budget has not been available, and that the financial pressures documented in Dan Wakeford's investigation, the inheritance spent, the legal fees mounting, the revenue streams underperforming are the reason.
Tough cookie. He's worked for the Gates Foundation, not by any means a place that traditionally shadowing snowflakes go and work at. You know, Sarah's a pretty tough cookie. She goes and taps on Harry's shoulder to point him to some people who are up on the balcony, and gives her the most unbelievable death stare you've ever seen in your life. And people saying, you just said, you know, that's absolutely classic Meghan, this kind of, you know, this kind of one face for the public and then another face, you know, yeah, there it is. I mean, incredible.
Being described as the poorest rich people in the room is a specific Montecito characterization, and it captures something real about the Sussex financial situation. They live in a house that signals enormous wealth. They maintain a security operation that costs millions annually. They project a lifestyle of extraordinary privilege. And the underlying financial position, according to multiple independent sources, is one in which the gap between the cost of that lifestyle and the revenue it generates is both significant and growing. The 5-year runway, the spent inheritance, the operating expenses that continue regardless of commercial performance. Now let's look at the polling, because this week produced significant new data that deserves careful analysis. YouGov's most recent survey shows that 64% of Britons support keeping the monarchy, and critically, this figure has not changed since January, despite everything that has happened in the intervening months. The Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor arrest, the Australian tour and its controversies, Charles's ongoing health challenges.
And she still can't help herself. Just imagine how she acts behind the scenes. And of course, look, we both know, because we have spoken to members of the Sussex Survivors Club over the years, that it is truly horrible behind the scenes, that she does drive people to tears regularly behind the scenes. So I don't know, the problem she's got, Tom, this attempt to constantly make herself the victim is going to keep encouraging people that she has treated terribly.
The questions about the institution's future, none of it has moved the needle on basic monarchical support. 64%, steady. The personal approval ratings tell a more nuanced story. William at 76%, Catherine at 75%, Anne at 70%, Charles at 60%. Camilla, and this is a genuinely significant development, up 7 points to 42%, her biggest rise in recent memory. The state visit has clearly done something for Camilla's numbers, and the images from New York, the Sarah Jessica Parker appearance, the Anna Wintour sunglasses moment, the warmth of the cultural reception have landed with the British public in a positive way. And then Harry at 30%, Meghan at 20%, Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor at 3%. The Harry figure requires a specific historical note to fully appreciate. There were polling moments in the years of his maximum popularity when Harry's approval rating was higher than the late Queen's.
About unlawful information gathering, David Sherborne made the point that unlawful information gathering is, by its nature, unlawful and covert. So if you can find a small example of it, that should be taken seriously as an indication there is more. Well, you can apply exactly the same rationale to workplace bullying. On the second point that you made, Dan, about, you know, I think that's a really interesting idea about how the Kardashians have been incredibly authentic to their true selves. And I think if Meghan actually lent in to being a bit of a B1 TCH and lent in to an amazing reality show of her screaming at her aides, "Get me a bloody project that works, you idiots!" And, you know, it would be an amazing show and we'd all love it. And
He was, at his peak, arguably the most beloved member of the royal family, the accessible, military-serving, Invictus-building younger brother whose warmth and genuine connection with people generated the kind of public affection that is not easily manufactured. From that peak, somewhere in the region of 80% and above to 30%, is a fall of approximately 50 percentage points. That fall, achieved without being arrested or convicted of any crime, without any singular catastrophic event, but through the steady accumulation of choices over 5 years, is historically extraordinary. The rehabilitation question, whether Harry could, under changed personal circumstances, rebuild public trust, is one that thoughtful observers are beginning to engage with rather than dismiss. The Army friends who stayed loyal, the Invictus community that continues to value his genuine contribution, the British public that retains, at some level, a residual warmth for the Harry who existed before the Sussex operation. These are real assets of a kind that very few people in his position retain after the equivalent of what he has done. The mountain to climb is enormous, but the mountain is not vertical. The key phrase in this analysis is changed personal circumstances. What would need to change is not primarily what Harry says or how he communicates or what PR strategy he deploys. What would need to change is the fundamental structure of his life, the commercial operation, the grievance narrative, the relationship with Meghan, the ongoing attachment to an identity as a victim of the institution.
Zero path to the throne and a rapidly dwindling reputation. He's perfectly positioned to become the first openly bisexual royal. The timing feels right. Why not lean into it, Harry? Now, look, I'm not making any suggestion about Harry's sexuality, but what I am suggesting, Tom, is it's quite inappropriate for someone who views themselves as a member of the British royal family to slap a man on the bottom during a public engagement. I mean, that's not very royal, Tom Sykes, I would argue.
Whether any of those things can change from within the current Sussex arrangement without some fundamental rupture in the arrangement itself is the question that observers consistently find themselves unable to answer with confidence. What can be said is that the 7 hardest years framing the astrology post, the university speeches about being the world's most trolled person, the ongoing victimhood narrative, is not a path toward rehabilitation. It is a path toward the further consolidation of a public image that the British public has assessed and rejected. 30% for Harry, 20% for Meghan, 81% for the dead Queen who served without complaint for 7 decades. The comparison is not flattering, and no amount of astrology can change the arithmetic. The Sussex Survivors Club has not gone away. The Jason Knauf email is still a matter of record. The death stare footage is still circulating. The renovation that has not happened at the Montecito house is still a symbol of financial pressures that the public presentation of the Sussex lifestyle is designed to obscure. And the 7 hardest years framing has generated the reaction that any honest reading of the situation would have predicted, not sympathy from the people who experienced those years from a different vantage point, but something much closer to the opposite. The pressure has not lifted on April 25th or any other date.
And tried to make that magazine a propagandist for Prince Harry and Meghan Markle too. Now he's independent, so he's sort of turned a little bit. But what he says Meghan and Harry should do...
The space to just exist without fighting for it is not something the current Sussex commercial model can provide, because the current Sussex commercial model requires constant fighting for attention, for revenue, for relevance, for the place in the conversation that diminishing returns keep threatening to eliminate. The astrologer is wrong. The pressure continues. And the people who know most about what generates pressure in Meghan's orbit are not the ones sharing posts about the hardest 7 years. They are the ones who left, some of them in pieces, and who are watching the 7 hardest years framing with a very specific kind of disbelief. Let me go deeper on a few of the specific threads that deserve more careful examination, starting with the astrology post itself and what it reveals about Meghan's current psychological and strategic position. The decision to share this specific piece of content at this specific moment is not random. Meghan does not post randomly. Everything that goes on her platforms is calculated, timed, and designed to achieve a specific effect. The question is, what effect was this post designed to achieve, and how well has it achieved it? The most straightforward reading is that the post was designed to generate sympathy, to position Meghan as someone who has suffered, who understands suffering, who can speak to the experience of people who have been through difficult periods. This is consistent with the broader Sussex communication strategy of victimhood positioning. The problem is that the specific audience, this post was designed to reach people dealing with genuine hardship, people who've actually experienced 7 difficult years, is exactly the audience.
Reporting on Harry and Meghan's career crisis, here is my honest assessment of what they should do next. And it's not what they want to hear. They need to disappear. Not forever, but strategically. The constant visibility is not helping them build brand equity. It's chipping away from it with every joint appearance and crazy royal tour. There needs to be scarcity, and when they come back, they need to come back separately. Meghan's path is actually clearer than the noise suggests. Stop the lifestyle positioning, stop the food products, stop standing slightly behind a man who also is struggling to define himself. Meghan was a compelling screen presence, and the world has simply forgotten that.
Most likely to find the comparison offensive. People who have actually suffered find it most difficult to extend sympathy to someone who has suffered from a position of extraordinary privilege and who frames that suffering in terms that erase the privilege entirely. The second possible reading is that the post was designed to address the marriage tension, to signal something to Harry about how she sees the past 7 years, to communicate through public content something that is not being communicated privately. This reading is more speculative, but the specific inclusion of the word spouse in the astrologer's subsequent gloss, whether it was your job, a spouse, or even your faith which saw you tested, is interesting. If that was read by Harry, and if the marriage tensions that sources describe are real, the implication is uncomfortable. Meghan is publicly associating the hardship of the past 7 years with a spouse who tested her through content shared to her platform for her followers to see. Whether Harry read it that way is unknowable. Whether he should have is a different question. The third reading is the most cynical and perhaps the most accurate. The post was timed to generate a news cycle during the state visit, to keep the Sussex name in the conversation during a week when the actual royal family was generating exceptional positive coverage. This reading is consistent with every previous Sussex insertion into positive royal moments, and it does not require Meghan to have calculated any of this consciously. The instinct to remain in the conversation, to ensure that no week passes without the Sussex name appearing alongside the institution's name, may be deeply ingrained enough to operate below the level of conscious strategy. Whatever the intent, the effect has been to generate this specific conversation about the gap between Meghan's claimed suffering and the documented reality of what working for her has cost the people she led. And that conversation, whatever its origin, is not one that benefits the Sussex brand. Now let me address the rehabilitation question for Harry more carefully, because I think it is being both overstated and understated simultaneously in different parts of the commentary. It is being overstated by people who suggest that Harry's rehabilitation is simply a matter of returning to Britain, saying sorry, and being welcomed back into the fold.
You can tell that he's new to independent media because you can still hear his baby in the background, and he hasn't got himself a proper camera yet. But we'll give him some lessons.
People quite like that, though, don't they? People quite like that.
At the beginning, they do. After a while, they get a bit sick of it. Wow, yeah. I mean, look, he's right. It's funny enough, as I said, I was talking to this person this morning, and I was saying the same thing. I was saying, she needs to do nothing for I said my diagnosis of it was they need to both do nothing for a year or two. Harry needs to write a fantastic book, potentially about Princess Diana. I think would be an amazing book that he could write.
The things Harry has done, the memoir, the Oprah interview, the Netflix documentary, the ongoing public attacks on William and Charles, have caused real and lasting damage to real people who loved him. A meaningful rehabilitation is not achievable through a press release or a carefully staged family photo. It requires something more fundamental, a genuine reckoning with what the past 5 years have cost, a willingness to acknowledge specific harms rather than offering general gestures of goodwill, and evidence of changed behavior sustained over time rather than performed contrition for a news cycle. It is being understated by people who suggest that rehabilitation is impossible, regardless of what Harry does. The British public has a long memory, but it also has a genuine capacity for forgiveness when forgiveness is earned rather than demanded. The 30% approval rating is a floor, not a ceiling. The people who rated Harry at 80% still exist. The warmth they felt for him was real. The Invictus connection, the veteran community, the genuine qualities that made him beloved in the first place, those did not disappear. They were buried under 5 years of choices that alienated the people who had valued them. But buried things can be excavated, not easily and not quickly, and not without genuine cost. But it is not impossible. The changed personal circumstances framing is the honest way to describe what rehabilitation would require, not different communications, not a better PR strategy.
Financially, the couple are a laughingstock in Montecito. A really good example of how financially challenged they are. It's almost unheard of to buy a house in Montecito and just move into it, right? You buy a house and you do like a $7 million remodeling job, right? To make it all up to date. You don't take the sort of, we've seen the insides of the house.
Yeah.
It's hideous. It's absolutely hideous.
A different life, one in which the commercial imperatives of the current Sussex operation are no longer the primary driver of Harry's public behavior. One in which the 7 hardest years framing is replaced by something more honest about what those years actually contained. One in which the ongoing attacks on the institution and the family stop because Harry himself has decided they should stop, rather than because a PR team has calculated that they should. Whether that different life is available to Harry within his current marriage is the question that multiple independent sources have consistently suggested has a negative answer. The divergence between what Harry wants, simplicity, authenticity, a return to the people, and the purposes that gave him meaning, and what Meghan wants, and what the commercial operation requires, the constant feeding of a narrative, the perpetual relevance cycle, the monetization of every available asset, including the children's royal titles. That divergence is structural. It cannot be resolved by a better communication strategy. It can only be resolved by a fundamental change in the structure of Harry's life. The polling numbers illuminate this from a different angle. Camilla, who arrived in public life with some of the worst approval ratings in the royal family's history, has spent 2 decades slowly, patiently, unglamorously rebuilding public trust through consistent and undramatic service. She is now at 42%, not great by the standards of the institution's most popular members, but a 7-point rise, and the clearest demonstration available that rehabilitation through consistent good behavior is possible over time. Harry's starting position is considerably better than Camilla's was. He has residual goodwill that she did not have.
No huge surprises. Elizabeth, still incredibly popular. Diana, still incredibly popular. Both departed. William, hugely popular. I mean, for any sort of modern figure of any kind, of 76% approval rating is nuts. Catherine, 75%. Actually, Princess Anne, always really viewed as an underappreciated asset, 70% support. King Charles, 60%. And then you go down to Camilla, 42, Harry, 30, Meghan, 20, Andrew Mountbatten wins at 3%. But actually, maybe Tom, some people have been talking up.
But he will need to demonstrate the same quality of patience and consistency and genuine service that she has demonstrated. And he will need to do it without the ongoing commercial operation that currently makes those qualities impossible to perform credibly. The financial picture adds urgency to all of these questions in a way that the people around Harry presumably understand, even if Harry himself does not. The 5-year runway, the spent inheritance, the underperforming commercial operation, the house that has not been renovated because the renovation budget's not available. The speaking fees at $50,000 per appearance, significant for most people, insufficient for the Sussex overhead structure. All of it creates a ticking clock that is getting louder. When the money runs out, or more precisely, when the gap between the cost of the Sussex lifestyle and the revenue the Sussex operation generates becomes impossible to bridge without some fundamental change, the choices about what kind of life Harry lives will be made by necessity rather than by preference. He may not get to choose Montana, but the Montecito mansion with its unrenovated interiors and its $3 million annual security bill may cease to be viable regardless of his preferences. And at that point, the question of what Harry's life looks like, what it is built around, what gives it meaning, what replaces the institution and the family and the purpose that he gave up, will be answered by circumstances rather than by any deliberate decision.
He was to take a harder line on Harry and emulate what we know is William's opinion. I think he would see those poll numbers. I think they could easily go up to 65, 66, 67. You know, could he get to 70 if he really did the right thing on Harry? I don't think it's beyond the realms of possibility. I think there's a huge wellspring of like we want to love Charles, we want to like Charles, we want him to do the right thing. We just need him to stop doing the idiotic things once in a while. You know, it'd be really helpful if he'd stop doing the idiotic things.
Whether the answer will be rehabilitation or further decline will depend on whether the circumstances produce the kind of genuine reckoning that the 30% approval rating has not yet produced. The Astrology Post says that the pressure lifts on April 25th. Multiple independent sources suggest the pressure is, if anything, building. The Sussex Survivors Club is still speaking to journalists. The polling is still at 30 and 20. The Montecito house still has not been renovated. And the 7 hardest years framing, however sincerely felt, does not describe the same 7 years that the people who worked for Meghan Markle experienced. The spirit daughter astrologer may believe that Meghan is the queen who has been through the hardest 7 years of her life and is about to reign again. The 30% approval rating is a more reliable indicator of the actual situation. And the people who left the Sussex operation in states of genuine distress, who are watching the 7 hardest years, framing with a specific kind of disbelief, are the most honest witnesses available to what those years actually contained. Their testimony is the testimony that matters, not the astrologers, not the People magazine profiles, not the carefully timed Instagram posts. The testimony of the people who were there, who tried to do their jobs, and who left carrying something they did not arrive with. That is the record of the 7 hardest years that nobody with a public platform seems willing to give the prominence it deserves, except quietly and persistently the people who lived it